Well, I predicted during my qualifying highlights video that there was likely to be a few retirements during this race, and it turns out I wasn't wrong. Here are the highlights from the 2026 Australian Grand Prix. Well, it was a bad start to the day for the home hero Oscar Piastri, who crashed his car on the way to the grid. His car was too heavily damaged and he had to retire from the race before the lights had even gone out. Speaking of lights out, it was a bit different than what we're used to. For one, there was two drivers missing from the grid. Hulkenberg was still in the pits and of course Oscar was out of the race. But also the start procedure itself has had to change with these new regulations. We saw the introduction of a blue pre-start light, which came on before the red lights to give the drivers more time to get their cars ready to go. And once the lights did go out, wow, what a start for Charles Leclerc. He went from P4 to P1 before the first corner. An amazing start for him. Ferrari appear to be the only team so far that have really sorted out their start procedure with that car. It wasn't a great start for Kimi Antonelli, unfortunately. Both Mercedes drivers reporting that they had battery power issues before the race started. And as the race continued, it became clear that the drivers were literally learning on the job, as were the commentators and even us fans. We were starting to understand how these new cars performed during a race. The drivers were starting to understand how best to use their battery power, learning when to deploy the power and when to conserve it. And it did give us a few good overtakes in the first half of the race. 10 laps in and Russell and Leclerc had swapped positions for P1 so many times, it was quite entertaining to watch. And it was certainly looking like it's much easier to overtake in these new cars than the previous regulations. I mean, Max Verstappen started in P20 and by 10 laps in, he was already up to P10. And then we got to lap 11 and the first retirement from the race when Isaac Hadjar's car started blowing smoke out the back and he had to pull over at the side of the track. And by this point, there was now 3 cars out of the race: Piastri, Hulkenberg, and Isaac Hadjar. Oh, sorry, my mistake. There was now 4 cars out of the race because on lap 15, Fernando Alonso was asked to come into the pits and retire the car. Oh, sorry, my mistake again. There was actually 5 cars out of the race because on lap 18, Valtteri Bottas pulled over on the side of the track and also had to retire. Oh, sorry, my mistake again. I keep getting this wrong. There was actually 4 cars on the track because a few laps later, Alonso came back out on track to, I guess, gather data. As you can see, by this point, it was hard to keep track of who was in the race and who wasn't. There had been so many retirements already and we weren't even halfway through. As the race continued, despite the multiple virtual safety cars, Ferrari, who were leading at this point, decided not to pit. And this meant that when they did pit, they dropped behind the leaders, who were now Russell and Antonelli. And Lando Norris was struggling in P5, not really making up any ground, but not losing any either. But Max Verstappen, speaking of making up ground, he had got all the way up to P6. Now, going into this race weekend, there was a lot of talk about whether Aston Martin were actually going to finish the race. That became clear on lap 38 when Lance Stroll also retired and then both cars were out of the race. It's such a shame. It's been a terrible start for the team. Hopefully it's not too long until they can start go racing again properly. By the last third of the race, everything had calmed down. All of the drivers were pretty much stuck in their positions, all managing their tyres, managing their energy. Everyone had done their pit stops and we were just kind of waiting for the race to end, really. Verstappen was trying his hardest to move up from P6 to P5 by overtaking Norris, but Norris was holding him off well. And then out of nowhere, Lance Stroll came back out on track, I presume to also gather more data for the team like Alonso did earlier in the race. It's clear that Aston Martin came into this weekend seeing it more as another testing session than a Grand Prix. And at the end of the race, it was George Russell who came out on top, winning the first Grand Prix of the 2026 season, with Kimi Antonelli in P2, so a 1-2 for Mercedes, a great start for them. The 2 Ferraris that looked quite competitive at the start of the race ended up finishing 3rd and 4th, victims of their own strategy, a story that we've heard many times before. 5th place went to Lando Norris, a decent finish for him in his first race as the championship leader, and Max Verstappen ended up finishing 6th place, which was great considering he started so far down the grid. And the top 10 was rounded out by Behrman, Lindblad, who had a great first race, and then Bortoleto and Gasly. Now, it was a good race, it was entertaining, but what is the point in changing the regulations to get the teams to produce more competitive cars that can follow closer and overtake more if they can't make it to the end of the race? You're not going to win a race by retiring. Yes, I know it's only the first race of the season, but the teams have had a lot of time to work on these cars, and they even had extra testing this year. So the fact that we're still losing cars to technical issues, it's not a good sign. Hopefully, as the season goes on, we'll start to see some changes in the regulations to make it a bit easier for the teams to work with them, and the drivers. Some of them are clearly not happy with these new cars. So yes, the Australian Grand Prix was entertaining to watch, a great first race of the season, but it's never nice seeing this many drivers retire, especially on race 1. As always, thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to subscribe to The Benchmark for more F1 content.